Today's daf is daf Pei Aleph. And we'll start with Ha'ochel, which is approximately five lines down from the top. The Mishnah says, Ha'ochel v'ashoseh ein mitztarfim. We don't integrate achila of hard food, of solid food, together with shtia of liquid food in order to create the shear. And there are two different shiurim in achila and shia. The shear for achila, the minimum amount that you chayav for Yom Kippur, violating Yom Kippur, the Chi of Karis is Kosevas Agasa, and Shia, it's Kimole Lugma. Montana, the Gemara wants to know what Shita does our Mishnah reflect, because what reason is there that Achila and Shia, both of which belong to the mitzvah of Inui, are not mitztarif? Omer of Chizda, the Machlokes Shnuya, that our Mishnah is not reflecting a universally accepted principle, but rather it's dependent upon the Machlokes Uke Rabbi Yeshua. And our Mishnah is the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua. The Snan, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah on Daf Yud Zayin, Klal Omer Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua's principle with regard to taking two chatichos, and neither of them in and of themselves would have a shear for tumah, and we can integrate the two. Here are the conditions. Kol shetumaso v'shi'uro shave, if both the tumah, the name of the tumah, the category of the tumah, and the shear of tumah are equal, then we can integrate the two. For example, let's say we have Kizayis min ames is mitame b'maguv masa, and let's say we have a half a zayis from one mess and another half a zayis from another mess, or let's say you have tumas nevela, you have a half a zayis from one nevela, another half a zayis from another, and you can take a case of shrotzim. The tumas sheretz is a shear of adasha, so you have a half of an adasha from one sheretz, and you can integrate it with a half of an adasha of another sheretz to be mitztarif as a shear shalem for tumah purposes, because we have both the same identical tumah and the same shear. However, in the following two scenarios, we cannot be mitztarif, according to Rabbi Yeshua. Number one, tumas of a lo shiuro. Let's say, for example, you have a tumah of one day. Now, which is also called a tumah kala, it's also called a tumas erev, and you can have it in the case of sheretz, you can have it in the case of nevela. So now you have a piece of sheretz with a piece of nevela. And although tumaso shava, they both have the identical tumah, which is generated by both sheretz and nevela, but they have two different shiurim. A nevela is metame b'shir kizayis, a sheretz b'shir adasha. Then there's no tziruf. Or the flip side, shi'uro shava, they have the same shear, but low tumasa. Let's say, for example, you have a chaticha mes and a chaticha of nevela. You have a piece of a corpse and a dead corpse of an animal, and they're both mitami with the same shear. They both have the shear of kizayis. It's not like the case that we gave between sheretz and nevela. Here, both have the identical shear of a kizayis, but the tum itself is different. Why? Because in the case of a mess, you have a full tumah of shivas yom. In the case of the nevela, the tumah is only a tumas erev. Is therefore there's no tziruf. And how much more so, it goes without saying, says Rabbi Yeshua, that lo tumas of a lo shiuro. Let's say you have a chatichas mess and a chatichas sheretz. The shear of a mess is a kizayis. The shear of a sheretz is kadash. So they have two different shiurim. And not only that, they have two different tumas, because the tumah of mess is shivas yom, and the tumah of sheretz is the tumas erev. Ein mitztarif. So in order to be mitzarif them, according to Rabbi Yeshua, you need both tumaso and shiuro shava. Now, how does this reflect on our Mishnah? Our Mishnah holds that you cannot be mitzarif achila and shasi on Yom Kippurim, and the reason for that is it's reflecting the shita of Yeshua, and here you have two different shiurim. And the shear for achila is koseves, the shear for shasiya is kimoli lugmav, they're not mitztarif. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, disagree with Rabbi Yeshua. They hold that even if you don't have tumasa v'shiurim shaveh, you can still be mitzarif to the one shear. And therefore, according to the Chachamim, Achila and Shasi on Yom Kippurim would be mitzaref. There's a long discussion here in the Achronim about where exactly the Shittas Chachamim appear, where we find them, but the implication is that this was the unique Shita of Yeshua, and the Chachamim disagree. Now, in a case where there is a tziruf of a tumah, so we don't know if they're mitzayef for the lesser shear, the more mekil shear, or the more machmir shear. Rav Nachman Omer Afilu Temer Rabbanan, I can reconcile that Mishnah even with Rabbanan, who rejected Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and they held that even without Tumas of Shirim Shava, we could still be mitzayef for the shear. Ad kan lo kami Rabbanan hasam elinyan tuma. The Rabbanan are willing in Masechet Me'ilah to be mitzayef two chatichos, even though they're not shavos, for tuma purposes. Why? The shem tuma chadhi. They all have one shem tuma. And since they both together belong to that one rubric of tuma, therefore, if together the two of them have a sheer tumah, we could be mitzaref them. Al hacha mishum yisuvei daitu. In Yom Kippur, the reason why you're chayav for both achila and shasiya is because of yishuv adas. It takes away the state of inu. V'hai, but a person who ate a half a shear of achila and a half a shear of shtiya, lo miyasvei daite. He has, in order to create a yishuv adas, he's got to either eat a full shear or he's got to drink a full shear. We're not going to be tzarif the achil and the shasiya. V'chein omer Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish also agrees that b'machlokas shnuya Rabbi Yoshua, our Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua. Klal om Rabbi Yeshua, like we saw in Rav Chizda, and Rabbi Yochanan Omar afilu tema Rabbanan. Ad kan lo kam Rabbanan hasam elinyan tuma aval hacha, but here mishum yisuvei daitehu, and therefore high lo kam yasvei daite. When he combines a solid food with a liquid food, he doesn't achieve yishuv adas. Oh, good morning, Jerry. So now we're going to learn the Mishnah on Daf Pei Aleph Amid Beit. So let's just summarize, since you may have missed one point here. Before we start the new Mishnah, we said that according to the Chachamim, with regard to Tumah, you can integrate two half shiurim together. Not only in the case where you have a half a shear of one nevela and another half a zayis of another nevela, but even in a case where you have, let's say, a nevela and a sheretz, which have two different shiurim, nevertheless, you could be mitzaref them, and we had to suffix exactly which shear you would use. But in the case of achila and shasi on Yom Kippurim, even the Rabbanan might agree that we cannot be mitzaref them because there's no yishuv adas. The Mishnah says, "Ochal v'shasa b'helam echad," if on Yom Kippur he forgot it on Yom. And he did so behelim echad, in one forgetfulness, eno chayv el chatas achas. So he violated the Isra Achila of Yom Kippurim. He violated the Isra Shtia on Yom Kippurim. These are not two separate Isurim. We have a principle called Shtia B'chlal Achila. Shtia is an extension, a subcategory of Achila. So he violated one Isra of Yom Kippur behelim echad. He's only chayv one chatas. And the law is that if you violate one avera b'shogeg, even if you do it multiple times, but if it was all behelim achas, you bring one chatos. However, ochal v'yasa malacha b'yom kippurim chayev shtei chatos. But here he violated two different isurim on Yom Kippurim, even though it was with one forgetfulness, one halama, one shogeg. He forgot it was Yom Kippur. He went ahead and he ate a shear of kakoseves, and he did a malacha. He's got to bring two chatos. This is the principle called isurim or shemos machalkim, the different shemos of the isur. The Torah prohibits achila under v'nisam es nafshel seichem. The Torah prohibits malacha under v'chol malacha lo tasu. The two different isurim, each one generates its own chiyuv chatas. Another din is achal ochlim she'ena ruim achila v'shasa mashkim she'ena ruim yilshia is pot. If he ate that which normally you wouldn't eat, or he drank what normally you would not drink, then he's pot. And the examples of drinking something that's not normally drunk are these two examples. Shasa tzir. Tzir is the moel that comes out of a dag, and murios is the moel that comes out of the kishkis. It's more like an oily substance that comes out of a fatty substance that comes out of the fish. People don't eat those parts of the fish, and therefore he's pot. I'll just read to you the English translation here. He says, just one second. Oh, he says that tzir is called fish brine, and murias is called fish fats. So we have fish brine. Let's just see if he adds anything in the note. The watery liquid that oozes from salted fish. Okay, fine. This is not normally eaten, and therefore he's pot. The Gemara says, "Amrei Shlokish, malo nemra azhara be'inui." We don't find that the Torah uses the language of azhara. Do not eat on Yom Kippurim. Do not drink on Yom Kippurim. It just says ta'anu es nafshel sechem. And Reish Lakish says, you know why? Mishum delo efshar. It's impossible for the Torah to achieve its goal and use a lashon of a lav. And we're going to learn now an entire sugya. Reish Lakish is going to go through all sorts of possible formulations that the Torah could have had, and none of them are successful. Heichi nichtov. What would the Torah have written? Im nichtov rachmana. If the Torah would say lo yochal, thou shalt not eat on Yom Kippur, achila b'kezayis. The shear of achila is kezayis, and on Yom Kippur he's not also until he eats more than a kezayis, and that's koseves. Nichtov rachmana lo seuna, which would be implying that you should not remove your state of inui, but now the Torah is using the word lo, which is a lashon lav. No. If it would have said lo seuna, we would have come to the exact opposite conclusion. Kum echol mashma. Lo seuna means thou shalt not be in a state of inui, but rather you have to eat. So now the Gemara offers another suggestion. Maskiv le Ravochia, nichtav rachmana hishamer pen lo seuna. And the lashon of hishamer is always a lashon of a lav, of an azara. And by saying be careful not to violate inui, of lo seuna, meaning to undo that stage, pen lo seuna, but you should not be in a state where you're not ma'una. You have to be in a state of ma'una, so there's a double negative here. Says the Gemara, that wouldn't have been sufficient either. Why? Because in Cain and Fishilu Lavi, then you'd have two lavin, and you'd be violating two lavin. Very often the Gemara says that the Isur is so severe that you violate a double lav. But in the case of Yom Kippur, the Torah only had one lav. Maskif le Rabbi Bar Abaye Nichov Rachmana. Why doesn't the Torah say he shamer b'mitzvas inui? So you don't have two lashonos and two lavim of hishomer ben. But be careful with the mitzvah of inui. And that hishomer would give me a lav without adding pen, and there would be only one lav. So the Gemara says in Cain, hishomer de lav, hishomer de essay. If the Torah would have written hishomer b'mitzvahs inui, it would not give me a lav, because hishomer has to be followed by do not do X. Here, hishomer b'mitzvahs inui, with the essay of inui. That word hishomer, therefore, would give me an essay. And we want to get a lav. Maskif lo Rav Ashi raises the following objection to Reish Lakish Nichtov the Torah could have said, Al Tasur min ha'inui. Do not deviate from inui. And that would give me a lav, only one single lav. Kasha. And the Gemara has no answer. So the bottom line is that Reish Lakish is rejected. We could have, in the Torah, said, Lo al tasur min ha'inu. Maskifla, I'm sorry, vitana. And now the Gemara says that we should quote a brisa, and if there is no azhara in the mitzvah of inui, then how could we punish him for violating inui? There's got to be an azhara. We have a principle of ein onshim elin ke masirin. So where's the azhara? Tana maisi lemehacha. The brisa actually quotes an opinion that found an azhara for inui in the Torah. How so? It says v'nisem es nafshel sech v'chol malacha lo sasu. So the brisa that we're going to get later on is going to say that based on this contiguity between v'nisem and kol malacha lo sasu, we're going to derive the principle of tosefes mi'achol ala kodesh, that on Erev Yom Kippur we have to add and begin Yom Kippur a little bit early on Erev Yom Kippur. Yochel, I might think, hey, onish kares al tosefes malacha. I might think that since the Torah says that you have to add a little piece of chol on Erev Yom Tiv, on Erev Yom Kippur, then if you violate that and you do malach and so forth, you would be chayav kares. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "V'chol hanefesh asher tasa kol malacha b'etzem hayom hazeh v'avadati es hanefesh hahi mikerev hama." And the word b'etzem hayom hazeh means on the day itself. Al itzumo shel yom onish kares. The eino onish kares al tosefes malacha. So if he does malacha during that short period of time when he accepted upon himself on Erev Yom Kippur, the Kedushas Hayom, nevertheless, it's not etzem hayom hazeh, therefore he's not chayav kares. Yochol lo yehei onish kares al tosefes malacha, but yehei onish kares al tosefes inui. Maybe if during that period of time of tosefes he eats something, he drinks something, he should be chayav kares. Talmud Lomar ki kol hanefesh asher lo seuna b'etzem hayom hazeh v'nichras hame'emer. And even in the pasuk of inui, the Torah adds the word b'etzem hayom hazeh al itzumo shel yom onish kares v'eino onish kares al tosefes inui. So if he eats during that period of time after he accepted upon himself tosefes Yom Kippur, he's not chayav kares. Yochel, I might think, lo yehei bechlal onesh. Okay, if he violates tosefes Yom Kippurim, he's not chayav kares. Aval yehei muzar al tosefes melacha. Maybe he should get malchus for violating a malacha during the time of tosefes. We only excluded it from kares. Talmud Lomar chol malacha lo tasu b'etzem hayom hazeh. When the Torah gives an azhara about malacha, it says b'etzem al itzuma shel yom muzar v'einu muzar al tosefes malacha. Yochai might think lo yeh muzar al tosefes malacha, lo yeh muzar al tosefes inui. I might logically conclude that he should get malchus if he eats or he drinks during the period of tosefes before etzem hayom hazeh, before nightfall, v'dinu, and I should derive it from a kal v'chomer. This is the way that the brisa is going to reject the havamina that you should be chayav malchus for violating tosefes inu. Uma malacha, malacha is more chomer than inu shelo heges b'shabbos v'yomim tovim. The Isser malacha applies on any day that's sanctified. That gives the Isser malacha an upgraded status. Is eno muzar aleha. Nevertheless, he's not going to be chayav malchus for violating a law in tosefes Yom Kippur as far as malacha is concerned. Is inui, which is kal. Eino noig b'shabbos v'yom tovim. The only one day of the year we have an Isser inui. Eino din. How much more so shelo yeh muzar olav, and you would not violate a lav and chayav malchus on tosefes Yom Kippur. Now the brisa continues. Aval azhara le'inui shel yom atzmo. What about an azhara? And this was our issue from the get-go. Where is there an Isser lav with regard to tosefes? Oh, now first tosefes Yom Kippur. No, I'm sorry. Again, what I said was correct. Until now, we've established that there's no lav for tosefes Yom Kippur. But what about a lav and azhara for inu on Yom Kippurim atzmo lo lamadnu? We don't see in the Torah. The Torah anywhere says lo hishamer pen with regard to achil and shasiyah minayin. And now the Brisa quotes a gzera shav. Lo yomar onesh b'malacha. The Torah didn't have to write a punishment for malach on Yom Kippurim to gomer mi inui. And we said that inui is kal relative to malacha, which is chamul. Ma inui she'eno noeg b'shabbosas v'yomim tovim onesh kares malacha she'noeges b'shabbos yom tov lo kolshkein. So why then did the Torah have to tell me that the punishment for violating malacha on Yom Kippurim is kares? I can certainly derive that with the Kal Vachomer from the explicit onesh of kares in the case of inui. And even though we have a principle called ein onchim min adin, however, this Tana is the Shita Rabbi Yehudin Makas Daf Yud Gimel that onchim min hadin. Other Achronim, the Siach Yitzchak, they try to interpret this Gemara even according to the Chachamim who hold ein onchim min hadin. So therefore, the Brisa asks, Lama Nemar, so why did the Torah have to spell out onesh kares for an otzem malach on Yom Kippurim? It's absolutely redundant. And the answer is mufna. It is redundant. That's exactly what it is. It's unnecessary. But it comes lahakish v'lodun mimenu. It's coming to teach us something about the mitzvah of inui with a gzera shav. Never onesh be'inui, v'never onesh b'malacha. And again, onesh b'malacha was unnecessary. But the Torah wrote onesh b'malacha to teach me the following: Ma melacha lo onash elam kein hizir. The Torah had to give a lav of kol melacha lo sasu in order to punish you with a chiyuv kares for violating a lav of malach on Yom Kippurim is af inui. So too in the case of inui, where the Torah spells out the punishment of kares, but it doesn't have an azara. There's no lo saseh, lo onash elam kein hizir. So now we're going to derive the azhara in inui with a gzera shava from the azhara in malach. The Gemara asks, Ma equal mifrach? Are you telling me that inui is kal vis-a-vis malacha? And that was your entire logic to prove that the words of kares in the parasha malacha were redundant? No. I'm going to prove to you that inui is more chomer than malacha. Ma inui shelo huta mechlolo. There is never a case where we were matir inui. Tomar b'malacha shehutra mechlolo. We have a mitzvah of hakrovas karbanos on the day of Yom Kippur, and we're going to violate various malachas in order to implement and fulfill the mitzvah of karbanos of the day of Yom Kippur. And now we have a chumrah in inui that we don't find in malacha. In malacha, we have the kula that we don't find the parallel kula in inui. By the way, I have a problem with this Gemara, but I didn't see anyone ask this question. We had a sugya back in Yoma with the various booths for the ish iti, and we asked him if he has to eat or drink, and that's all for the sake of the soya mishtalech. So we see that even for the sake of the avodas hayom, we can override the isa achil and jasia. I don't know, the Gemara doesn't raise that question. Ella, so Gemara says we have to change the brisa a little bit. Lo yomar onesh be'inui. The Torah didn't have to tell me onesh, meaning kare, spell it out in the case of inui, the gomer mi malacha. Ma malacha, which is relatively kal because huter mechlolo in the case of karbanos, shatorim shehuter mechlolo, onesh kares is inui. Shalo huter mechlolo lo kolshkein. How much more so he should be violating, and he should be punished with kares. So now the kares in inui is superfluous; it's unnecessary. The lama nemar. Why did the Torah have to spell out onesh kares? We could have derived onesh kares in inui from a kavachom from onesh kares in malacha, based on the premise that inui is more chomer than malacha. Mufta. It's redundant. And why did the Torah spell out kares in an unnecessary way in the case of inui? Lahakish v'lodim mimena gzera shava. To set up a gzera shava, that's mufna. Nemar onesh be'inui. V'nemar onesh b'malacha. and we don't need the onish and inui. Is ma malacha onish v'hizir, af inui onish v'hizir. So just like in malacha there's an azhara, and even though in inui we don't find an azhara, we'll derive the azhara from this gzeirat shava. Yeah, you found one chumrah in Yom Kippur as far as Inu is concerned, above and beyond Malacha, but on the other hand, we have a chumrah Malacha above and beyond Inu, that Malacha is usher all the days that are sanctified. And therefore, we cannot derive the onish of Inu from the onish of Malacha, and therefore, the onish written in Inu is not mufna, and therefore you don't have a Gzera Shava. Amar Avina, Hai Tana, Etzem Gomar. The Tana of this brisa derived the Azhar of Inui from the Azhar of Malach with a different Gzera Shava, from Etzem. With regard to Inui, it says, Ki kol ha-nefesh shel-una bi Etzem hayom hazeh menichusa. With regard to Malach, it says, Kol ha-nefesh shel-tasa kol malacha bi Etzem hayom hazeh. And therefore, the word Etzem in the pasuk is completely redundant, and it's telling me mufna for Gzeirat Shava. And therefore, just like there's an Azhara in Malacha, so too there's an Azhara in Inui, based on this Gzeirat Shava. And the Gemara clarifies mufna when you have a redundant pasuk, and now it's ready to be used as a drasha. To ilo mufna, if not for the fact that it was redundant, and if Luyitzur, neither of them redundant, we would reject the Gzeiras Shava, and we would say that we cannot derive an Azhar and Inui from Azhar Malacha, because we would have applied the logic that Malacha is more common than Inui insofar as it applies on Shabbosos and Yomim Tov. But now that the pasuk is superfluous, therefore we're going to use it for Gzeiras Shava. The Gemara says, La'e is a Lashon Emes. Emes, afnuye mufna. There is in this pasuk a certain element of redundancy for the drasha. And now the Gemara is going to spell it out. Michti, chamisha kroi ksivi b'malach. There are 5 times that the Torah repeats the Yisra Malach on Yom Kippur. We have a whole list here. Chad, lazhar d'leil. Chad, li onesh di Yoma. Chad di onesh d'leila. So we have an azhara for the day, another azhara for the night of Yom Kippur, a third onesh for Yoma, and a fourth onesh for Leila. Again, this is a pele of a sugya, because Kedusha Sayom encompasses 24 hours. Why is there a havmi that we split between the night of Yom Kippur and the day of Yom Kippur? Now, it's true that there is a concept of a tainus on the day without the night, but that's on a D'Rabbanan level. On a D'Oraisa level, we never split the day itself. In any event, we're left with a 5th extra time that it says, Iser Asiyas Malach Yom Kippur, Chad Lafnuye, Lemigmar, Inui Mi Malacha. It's redundant in order to set up this Gzeirat Shava of Inui B'Malacha, Bein Dimo, Bein B'Layim. To Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, we have a brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, Nemer Kan Inui, V'Nemer Lahalon Inui, both with regard to Yom Kippur. And in the Parsha of Namru Rasa, it says Inui, and the pasuk says Al Dvar Asher Inos Hs Re'ehu, Ma Lahalon, just like in the case of Namru Rasa, Lo Onash Elim Kein Hizir, and there's a lav Shenema, V'El Hs Amitecha Lo Sitein Shchavtecha, is Afkan here to an Yom Kippur on a Shalom Keda Hizir. Now the Gemara brings another source, possibly for the Azhar of Inui B'Yom Kippurim. Rav Achabar Yaakov Amar Yoliv Shabbos Shabboson Mishabbos Breishis. With regard to Yom Kippur, the Torah says Shabbos Shabboson Hilochem. With regard to Shabbos Breishis, it says Ubayom Ashvi Shabbos Shabboson. And now we have another Gzeirat Shava. Mala Halon, just like in the case of Shabbos Breishis, so on Shalom Keda Hizir. And the Torah says, Lo tasa kol malacha, is afkan here to an Yom Kippur, lo onash elim kein hizir.